Welcome back, everyone, to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today, I have Chief Francisco from Bloomfield PD in New Mexico. He has 27 years in law enforcement. He served the last 10 years as Chief of Police, and he's also a U.S. Army veteran. He has an associate's in police science and a bachelor's degree in psychology. Welcome to the show, Chief Francisco.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. So give us a little bit of background. You are a U.S. Army veteran. You've been in law enforcement a long time. So anything you'd like to share about yourself or your career?
I've kind of had a long career. It's a little unorthodox, I guess. I went into the military right out of high school, did 4 years, came back. I couldn't find a good paying job in my field. I was a communication tech. My mother just happened to be a dispatcher at a time and never thought about being in law enforcement ever. It was like the furthest thing from my mind. And so my mom said, why don't you go try to be a cop? So I did, and I got in, and then it rolled forward from there. So I worked for a small agency somewhere in Bloomfield in this area, Aztec Police Department, for a couple of years. It was very small, not a lot going on, didn't learn a lot. So I went to a larger agency, which is the sheriff's office in San Juan County, and I worked there for about 14 years. I trained, FTO'd, field trained many officers. At one point, I think it was about 60 officers. I did a lot in my 14 years there. I also was on a full-time DWI enforcement team for 3 years, and I got an award for doing that because I arrested like 90 people in about 9 months for DWI and prosecuted them all. So that's one thing that I'm kind of proud of. I started trying to move up the ranks. It was kind of difficult at the time. It was pretty tight competition back in the day because there wasn't really a big deficit in law enforcement officers at the time, probably about 2007 to 14. So I went back to college thinking, college will help me get to where I need to go. So I went back to college full time while working and, little kids under my arm and everything else. So I got my degree, my bachelor's degree. And then I also went back into the National Guard because I got a degree and I've always wanted to be an officer in the military. So I decided, since I had a degree, I was still young enough. I had some experience already. I got into the officer candidate school, which is, if you don't know about that, it's a leadership school that develops officers, the rank of officers in the military. So I went through that. It was very intense. It was a year-long training, weekends, and then about 2 weeks at the beginning and 2 weeks at the end of immersive leadership training and physical, training. Because if you're not physically fit, it's hard to make good decisions under stress. So they really stress, being physically fit and mentally fit, so you can make those stressful decisions under fire, basically, which is similar to what we do in law enforcement because we have to make quick decisions. Lives are on the line and things like that. So we have to make those decisions very quickly. And if you're not physically fit and you have a lot of stress, your judgment is clouded. So I really, push that a lot, that we need to be physically fit. So about the same time, I moved to another department, Farmington Police Department, for a couple of years. An opportunity opened up to become the chief of police for the Navajo Police Department, which is the largest tribal police department in the United States, and I think the world. 27,000 square miles. It had 200 police officers. So I became chief there. I worked there for about 5.5 years, which was very trying because they didn't have an acting chief for 10 years before I got there. So leadership was in disarray. The numbers had shrunk a lot. Recruiting was almost nothing. And there was no leadership in place. There was sergeants acting in the place of captains and sometimes as the chief. So that was a trying time, but I learned a lot because it was a huge department and a lot of problems to go through. A lot of generational problems also. Because you had old officers who were from a different culture, clashing with, you're trying to hire new officers and they didn't understand the cultural differences between the generations. And so I had a lot of, trial by error on that part of it. About 5.5 years, I decided I wanted to be closer to home because at that job, I was commuting about 1.5 hours, 2 hours every single day to go to work, which is a long way. So I decided to come to a smaller department, which is my hometown department where I grew up and was born, in Bloomfield Police Department. And I've been here as a chief for about 4.5 years now. So,
wow. So full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. There's a couple of things that I wanted to circle back on. You said that it's so interesting when I hear your resumes and the things that you go through. I'm always sitting here and I'm like, man, I'm an underachiever. Like, that's a lot. But you said something that stuck out to me, and you said you went back to school and you were doing all these things. You said kids under the arm.
Yep.
So So you were also juggling your personal life and your professional life. What would you say to someone who says that they don't have enough time?
I get that a lot. Like I tell them, well, if you want to move up, you got to go get the degree. You got to get the time. And a lot of people don't have a heavy, home life. Maybe they're single or maybe have one kid. I sound like I did it. I went back to school. I had two older kids. I went through a divorce. I had two younger kids. My older ones were in high school and out, and then my younger ones were brand new. So I was going to school, working in graveyards, a full load of class. I finished in under 4 years, from no credits all the way to my bachelor's degree, on shift, and still maintaining my numbers. So I tell them, like, you can do it. And if you don't think you can do it, then you're never going to succeed. And my wife told me the other day, is like, there's something you always say. And she was going to tell it to her coworkers, because they're trying to move up and get positions. Says, well, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So if you don't try, you're never going to succeed. So sometimes, it's really difficult. You're going to think it's going to be difficult, think you can't do it. But if you never try, you're never going to succeed. So I tell them, you just got to get in there and do it. You will figure it out. So. Yeah.
And I think like the goal is how do we get to the end of our lives or the end of our careers and have fewer of those I wish statements, or, what if I would have done that? What would my life have looked like? How do we get to the end of this? Because of course there's always going to be something, but how can we have fewer of those? How can we be like, yeah, like I tried. I really tried to, do my best and to make it happen. And I think that whenever I hear someone say, I don't have time, you're right. If you're going to tell yourself you don't have time, you don't have time. But if you can prioritize your time and you can be more effective with your time, I think that we all have a lot more time than we think, but it's where our priorities, and are we willing to make the sacrifice? Because it is short-term discomfort for long-term gain. That 4 years in the grand scope of everything is short-term. Yep. Short-term discomfort. Obviously, there's probably a lot going on during that time, but now long-term gain because of it.
Yeah. And you can't be afraid to fail. I think that people get paralyzed by, they have to have the perfect, they have to succeed. They have to do something that they're going to be successful at. You have to be afraid not be afraid to fail, because you will fail, but you can't let that stop you. And you got to try again. And some people are just paralyzed by that. And that's another thing in my leadership is I've seen people wait to make a perfect plan or wait to make, the perfect circumstances, and they never make a decision. So kind of my mantra has been, if you have 50% of a plan, that's going to probably, you're 50% sure of it, then just do it. Because if you don't do it, you're never going to make a decision. You're going to, have a paralysis of decision making if you just wait around until you get the perfect situation. So that goes with life too. You can't just wait for the perfect opportunity. You got to take those chances. And if you have a 51% chance of doing it, then just take that chance.
No, I like that. And I think too, if we can also share more about our failures, I think people will feel more comfortable, and it's interesting because, obviously the conversation we had, it was like, tell us about your career, and there's highlights, right? You're like, I accomplished this, I accomplished this, I accomplished this. But what I really appreciated was kind of towards the end where you're like, yeah, like these were really trying times. These were really hard. This was something that was very difficult for me. And I think we have to remember that for everyone who has reached pinnacles in their life or their career, there was a lot of failure and a lot of heartache and a lot of sacrifice that went into that, and I think that we don't share that enough with others. And maybe that's why there's a lot of fear around failure, because people think that they're the only ones that are going to fail, and I love looking at some of the most successful people in the world or in history. And when you actually really take a deep dive into how they got there, there was a lot of heartache along the way. There was a lot of tripping and falling flat on your face, and people don't realize that, and so because I think that we want to give this perception of perfection, and we don't want to be judged, and we don't want to look like we're failures, that people are afraid to take the chance. But I think if we were to share more of our mistakes and our failures, then maybe it becomes a little bit more normal.
Yeah, I believe that too. So
Yeah.
I did, I assessed for sergeant, I don't know, 4 or 5 times when I was at the sheriff's office. I kept trying. And then I said, well, if this isn't working, I'm going to go back to school and try something different. So I had a lot of failure in that regard, trying to move up in the ranks. And it was disheartening. And then you gather yourself up and say, what else can I do to make myself better? And that's why I went back to school. And obviously it worked out for me. And I try to tell my subordinates now, I was like, you got to do these things. I mean, you put yourself out there. If you just complain about it, and I think it goes along with morale. Like, I think there's a lot of negativity, admin versus patrol officers, like they just want their favorites. But some of it is just they got to try harder and they got to put themselves out there. And they're some of them actually stop themselves because they think, well, I'm not going to be picked because I'm not in that group or whatever. And I've tried really hard. When we talk about culture in our police departments, that's what I really tried hard at both my police departments, the Navajo PD and Bloomfield here, is that you try to make it fair, give everybody a chance and be transparent and understand that we want the best people. And if you fail, we'll help you develop more. And leadership development and giving them the training and, giving them the mentorship to move up and encouraging them to learn is a good thing for the department. It helps morale when you fail, and they're not afraid to fail as much as we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think, so I had one chief say, and this is something that really stuck with me. He said that he failed a lot. He put himself up for promotion many, many times and didn't get it many, many times. But he made sure, and he told everyone, he said, you're going to see me again. And when you see me again and you say no, it's not going to be for the same reason. It's going to be for a different reason, and so how can you take that constructive feedback and how can you improve? And it's not to say that you might not get another no, but can you get a different no? And I think that's improvement. And for you to say, hey, how do we keep getting up and how do we keep trying? To me, that's resiliency. How do we keep moving forward? Even when we have, those valleys in our life or those hardship in our lives. And how do we find the courage? How do we find the motivation? How do we find the dedication? How do we keep going in a forward trajectory, even when life gets you down sometimes, and I just loved how he was like, I promised everyone, you're never going to tell me no for the same reason twice.
Right. That's a good one.
Yeah. I did want to talk a little bit and circle back and talk a little bit about leadership. So you said that you went to a leadership school. You learned a ton about leadership. What do you think are the qualities that make a good leader? And maybe what are some of the most valuable lessons you've learned about leadership?
I think why I have been successful is really you got to learn to be a follower. First of all, you got to learn to follow directions, and you got to listen. You can't just be barking orders and telling people what to do. I mean, at some point they expect you to make a decision, but if you listen, that's the biggest part of leadership. Is if your subordinates think they're valued, you're listening to them, honestly listening to them, and taking what they're saying and repeating it and taking it into account and making your decisions based on what their input is. They really appreciate that in leadership because they feel they're part of it. They feel like they're just not being told what to do. They feel as part of the whole organization that they're moving forward as a group, not just being told what to do. So I think that's a huge key that sometimes gets lost because you move up in rank and you're the boss. You can tell people what to do and you don't have to listen to them. You just tell them, this is how it's going to be. But if you take the time to listen, when you have the time, sometimes you don't have the time. But a lot of times in law enforcement, especially as a chief, you have plenty of time to take into account, talk to your patrol officers, talk to your sergeants. When you're making big decisions or policy decisions or hiring decisions, you listen to them. And it goes a very, very long way.
Yeah. How much do you think leadership influences morale or stress? You said that earlier, like sometimes it feels like there's kind of like a battle between people, but how much do you think leadership actually influences the culture or the morale?
I think it is huge. So we've been successful, like we talked about earlier. We had a full police department for almost the entire time I've been here. We had very few vacancies. We have people wanting to come over from other departments that sometimes make much more money than my police officers in my department is because they know the culture is good. But I also listen to them when they come over, like what's going on at your current department. and it does seem like they're not supported. There's a admin versus patrol. They're just being told what to do. They're not appreciating them. And I think leadership where you're welcomed, you're listened to, you're a part of the decision-making process. And the biggest thing I think is a culture that you're free. You feel free to make mistakes. You're not scared to make mistakes, not free to make mistakes. Because we make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And those are not to put a mark on your record or you're shunned or you're put in the margins because you messed up a few times. Officers deal with a lot of stuff that are dynamic. There's never the right answer. There's a million different ways to do things. There's good, better, and best sometimes. But they make mistakes, and they shouldn't feel like they can't ever make a mistake. And they should feel from their leadership that those mistakes are chances to get better, fix those things, and so they don't happen again. And my philosophy on leadership in that regard is I want to make sure the community is safe from those mistakes, but I also want that officer to not make those again, to save his career, to make him better, and keep that longevity. And I think if they feel like they're free to make those kind of mistakes and they're not going to be ostracized for the rest of their career, it takes a lot of stress off them. There's a lot of stress on those officers when they feel they're not being supported or they're second guessed all the time. They're being looked over their shoulder, and they feel that's a lot of stress to hold on when they feel like they can't make a mistake. Plus, with body cameras and things that have changed over the years, they're already kind of stressed because they know they're being watched. Excuse me. And that everything's being recorded, and it can be second guessed. So I really try to take that into account when I'm looking at videos with officers. Is you can't just take the video for face value. There's a million different things, and you have to kind of bring your experience as you were on patrol that, hey, he's making a decision with what's in front of him, and what's presented to me in this video is not completely the whole story. So really giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I was actually reflecting on this the other day, and I was thinking about how law enforcement is maybe the only career that's ever existed where perfection is the expectation, and how incredibly stressful, like how the amount of pressure to put on someone to say, hey, you're expected to be perfect in absolutely everything that you do. And you have to also operate in your personal life perfectly because everyone's watching you, because they know what you do professionally. And there's no other career out there that's like that. We don't even look at surgeons and say, hey, you guys, you have to be absolutely perfect. We understand that there's always going to be mistakes, especially when we're talking about human nature. And of course, it's really hard to change what happens outside of the organization, right? If the public is like, I expect you to be perfect, you're already going to have that stress and that pressure. Everyone's filming everything, really difficult. But to your point, how can you within the organization create a safe space where they can breathe, where they feel like it's okay for them to be human, and actually they're celebrated for being human, and you want to help them to be the best versions of themselves that they can be as an organization. And, you're there to listen to them if they have challenges. You're also there to applaud them when they have successes. And so I think when we talk about, the culture of the organization, it does play a huge role in overall wellness, and I've had lots of conversations with officers offline where they've talked about it, where they're like, the stress within the organization is far greater than what we're feeling or seeing on the streets. And so for you as a team to focus on that of like, hey, how can we make sure that we're supporting them? We understand that they're humans, and all we want is for them to be super successful. And then what are those actions that we have to take to get there?
Yeah. And that's what I really try to do. And part of that is bringing them to the table on decision making. So I have officers come to the supervisor meetings to see how we're making decisions and what we're talking about. So they're not felt like they're in the dark and we're just making decisions in this, glass house without their input. And they understand, and making them understand why we're doing things is a big, huge part of it. Because if we're just making decisions, not explaining it, then they kind of, they make up their own narrative. But if you're explaining like we're doing this because of this, to protect your rights, protect citizens, protect the department from litigation, or just to, make sure we don't lose cases, it's much more much better received by the officer. And that reduces stress on them, because the unknown, I think, is the biggest stress. Not knowing what the admin is thinking, knowing if they're going to get in trouble. If they have consistency in discipline and expectation, that alleviates a lot of stress.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got a little bit harsh there.
Okay. I think that it's also really hard when you leave things up to guesswork. Like, people don't understand why decisions are being made, then they're going to come up with their own conclusions. Yep. And we see this time and time again, right? I've heard this before where they're like, this happened. And you're like, wait, hold on. That is actually not what happened at all. Like, we tried this, this wasn't successful because this. But if there isn't a two-way street or open line of communication for both parties to understand what were the efforts, why was the decision made in that way, then it is hard, because then there's one side that's just guessing. They're making it up on their own. And I think that's when you start to see frustrations. That's when you start to see things kind of unravel, because, our minds will go all kinds of crazy places. I was actually just talking to someone the other day, and they said that most of what we think is going to happen or has happened, like, actually hasn't. Our brain kind of makes it up. And I've seen this statistic before. They said 80% of what we worry about is actually not true, and will never actually happen. And so our minds will make up these narratives that aren't true. But if you're really transparent and you're communicative and you're telling them the why behind it, then they don't have the opportunity to make up something and, do the guesswork.
Yeah. And kind of go along with that, and I mean, we're explaining the why, but my other focus is just developing leaders in the department. So I think there's been historically in law enforcement, you move through the ranks or you don't move through the ranks, but a position opens and nobody's prepared you to take that position. So you're going from patrol to sergeant. Nobody's really gave you training the leading up to that, and all the way up to chief. So getting them that training before it even happens, so they're prepared and understand what that next role is and why the decisions are made, really alleviates a lot of stress too. And it really alleviates stress for the whole organization and their future, because they aren't so worried about the unknowns. They know, hey, I can take that position if it opens up. I can, make sure the department goes forward. All of us have been trained the same way. We're going to move forward. So if somebody leaves, it's not going to leave a huge hole where there's the unknown, which is a stressful thing, because when people think that the chief's going to leave or a lieutenant, like, who's going to take over next? It really causes stress inside the organization, because they could get a bad leader in there. They don't know who's going to be in there. And I've seen that firsthand several times. Right now it's kind of going on in my department. They're kind of expecting some changeover, and they're not sure how that's going to look. So there is stress, but preparing everybody early is a huge thing for me. And I think it's where we failed as law enforcement, is sometimes we just put a chief in place and they have no experience. Nobody's told them what to do. Nobody's mentored them, or a captain or a lieutenant. We really got to concentrate on making sure everybody understands their next roll up, or maybe even two up, so they're ready to take over, because law enforcement is pretty young now. A lot of people are retired. A lot of people are going to retire that have years on. I mean, I have 27 years on. I'm probably not going to go anywhere for a while, but if I leave, that's 20 years, 7 years experience. And a lot of departments are very young, like 5 or 6 years. And you have 5 or 6 year officers taking over as sergeant, and then training. You have 2-year officers training new officers. So if we don't get ahead of that, we're going to be in a crisis where there's no development in leadership, and we're going to have a hard time getting out of that hole.
Yeah. I heard this before, that historically it was hire and then train. And it sounds to me like you're really focusing on how do we train to prepare them for the hire. And I know a lot of chiefs are talking about this, and it really is in the whole realm and conversation of wellness and its professional development. How do we have succession planning, and how do you prepare everyone for the next step? And I think it's this idea of, how do you uplift everybody? How do you continue to improve everyone's skills so that they are ready? But I think that professional development also plays a role into wellness. And you said this earlier, and I wanted to reiterate it because you said it really fast, and I wanted to make sure that everyone heard it. You are fully staffed. I know a lot of agencies are really struggling with this, and you explained some of those reasons why. But one of the things that you said earlier that I thought was worth revisiting was you said that people are wanting to come to your agency even though you pay a lot less than other organizations. And I just had a conversation 2 days ago with another agency where they said that they did a job fair. And there were a bunch of other agencies there, and they were like, how do we stand out? Because everyone's fighting against each other right now for the same pool of candidates. Right. And they're like, well, what makes us different or special? And, they were like, we have all the things, we have the training opportunities, and we have the, fancy equipment, and we have the drones, and we have all the things, right? Like, and every other agency within like their direct area also has those things. Yeah. And they're like, what we think we do really well is we take care of our people. And we really have an emphasis on wellness and culture, and, here are the things that we do to take care of you. And they had a line like wrapped around the building, and everyone else kind of had spatterings. And I think that it's a testament to the younger generation that's coming in today, and the current workforce. I think it's changing, that not everybody, and of course there are going to be people who are motivated by money, and you're going to see people hopping around for different bonuses and, raises. But I think that we're starting to see that people are valuing what the organization is doing to take care of their longevity and their wellness and their training and their development. And what does that look like? And it's not necessarily all about the paycheck. So I wanted to circle back to that. And I thought that was really interesting that you said that people are coming to you, and it's not because you pay more, but it's because of the culture.
It is the culture. When we take care of them, we develop them as leaders, we give them the opportunity. And the big advantage I have, because I do have a full staff. I mean, we're a small department, so it's still hard to manage schedules and times off because we only have 20 people. It's a small department. Compared to my previous department was 200. It's a huge difference, and there's a cultural differences between those. But if you keep as much staff as you can, you're able to give people days off. They can take those times off when their family needs it. They can use their vacation. We have 12-hour shifts, so they have three days off anyways, depending on how their shifts fall. And encouraging those things, not saying no, and within a department, the officers are willing to cover for each other when they have, something that's really important to them, like a travel vacation with the family, or maybe there's graduation. So we really concentrate on that and try to understand and keep ahead of what's going on with our officers' families and home life, and encouraging them. And they can't just put law enforcement as their entire life. And that's something I've really learned. It was a hard lesson to learn too, is you got to have a life outside of the department. If you put everything into being a police officer and then something happens, you just fall apart. So we encourage them to have their lives and keep those, maintaining their home life and their hobbies outside of police department is really important to their well-being. And so we're able to do that with a full staff. And I really, really try hard to make sure we keep that, because if we lose a couple of people, we'll not be able to do that. And once you get too far in the hole with officers, then the officers are overworked. They have to do overtime. You're having to cover shifts, and you lose that ability. So some departments aren't able to do that, but that's something I've protected fiercely in my tenure here, is keeping as many staff as we can to keep that culture going, and where we can give those officers their family time and off time.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I was just asked this question right before hopping on this call, and they asked me, in my experience on the podcast, because we've interviewed 400 chiefs so far. He said, what was like the biggest learning objective that I've learned through the podcast? And I was like, wow, that's a great question, and I was like, let me think about it, because there's a few ways that I look at it. And I told him, I was like, on a personal level, I've learned the human side of you guys, and like, what an honor for me to be able to see that, to see that you guys are parents, your friends, your family members, like, your actual people behind what you do. And I think there's so much value in people seeing that about you guys. And I do some on-site work here locally, and I'm bringing on some new team members. And I had this girl come with me, and we left to kind of debrief and talk about it. And she was like, I was so scared. And I was like, why were you scared? And she's like, because I'm a law-abiding citizen. And anytime, she's like, I always try to avoid like contact. And like, I just, she's like, I just felt like scared. And I was like, I can see that. But I told her, I was like, these are dads, their wives, there's humans behind this. And it's really important that we focus on that side of it. And then I told him that the biggest learning objective I think that I've heard, or the most common thing that I've heard, is what you just said. I would say almost every chief that I've talked to so far, one of their biggest I wish statements was that they wish that they would have prioritized their home and their family life more. And they wouldn't have allowed themselves to become so wrapped in the identity of being an officer or a chief, or, and my hope is that through these conversations, we can start to understand that, one, we can learn from each other, understand that you guys are human, even though that you do superhuman things and your career is extremely hard, that at the end of the day, there's a person behind the badge and what you do. And how can we relay that message to the younger generation? Because I did the same thing. I prioritized my career over my family, and I have a lot of I wishes in that sense. And so how do we get them to understand that, us older people know what we're talking about, and maybe don't make the same exact mistakes that we have, take that time, when you're not at work, use that time to connect with your friends and your family, and, make sure that you're participating in the important parts of your life and the things that you can't get back, because time goes by so fast. And there's a lot of moments you can't get back if you don't prioritize them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And one of the most important things I was told by my dad, and, it wasn't until I was in my 40s that he told me this, is he worked really hard to get us kids a house. And, he was gone a lot. He wasn't in law enforcement, but he worked in the oil field and just worked a lot. And he says he wished he would have kind of backed off and spent more time with us as kids. Mm-hmm. And since he told me that, it was pretty went straight to my heart. And I was like, I got to spend more time with my kids and my sons and my daughters as much as I can, and make sure I'm there for them as they're growing up, especially as teenagers. So, that's a really important thing. And it's a really big thing in my life when you said that. So,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, unfortunately, sometimes we have to make our own mistakes, and sometimes we get to learn from other people's mistakes. And there are a lot of things that I can't get back. But because I've experienced that, because now I know what not to do, I have a really good gauge on what is important and what isn't. And I used to think, I used to have actual, I wouldn't say full-blown panic attacks, but I would have just so much anxiety. I'd be like, I have to do all of these things right now, or else, everything's going to burn down without me. And I think the older I've gotten, and also being able to learn from some of those things that I've done in the past, I understand what is necessary and what can wait. And I almost have a bucket system now where I understand, okay, this is high priority, this is low priority, this needs to be done right now, this can be done in a couple days. And I think we have to gauge that, because we can start to and for me, I just think I thought I was more important than I was, to be honest, and I thought that I wasn't ever going to succeed if I didn't, put 100,000% into everything that I did professionally. And now I have a different perspective. And so my hope is that, like I said, through these conversations, we can, allow other people to understand that it's okay. You don't have to do everything right now. There's always going to be more to do. There's always going to be more emails. There's always going to be more tasks. There's always going to be more overtime. There's always going to be those things. But what is the high priority and what is the low priority? Can you make it to your kid's soccer game, but you're just choosing not to? Mm-hmm. Can you take the weekend off and, take your spouse out on, a date? What does that look like? Are there things that you can do that you're just not doing? And of course, sometimes there's things that you just can't do. But I think that we have to slow down a little bit, and we have to zoom out a little bit, and we have to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's something I really have to tell my staff too, because they're so worried sometimes. Like, is it really that big a deal? Because I came from a bigger department where there's a lot of, emergencies, and like, this isn't a big deal. I mean, we can take a day, like you can sleep on it. Don't get so worked up. Take the time. You don't have to jump in and take care of this right now or get worked up about it. So I'm constantly telling them, like, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. So sometimes they get after me because I'm like, you don't really care. It's like, well, it's not that I care, but I know this isn't a priority right now, and it's not something to get too worked up about. Like, we can deal with this. It's not an emergency. When there's an emergency, yeah, we'll deal with an emergency, but this is an emergency. So I'm constantly, trying to mentor my subordinates that nothing is so important. Nothing is so much of an emergency that you have to get so worked up about it. Just take some time, let it sink in. Sometimes take a day or two or the weekend and come back and let's make a decision then. So that's something that needs to be mentored and told to our officers constantly and our subordinates. And I think it's a good leadership trait, is just not jumping into things and not thinking you have to jump into it right now.
Yeah. And can we hold each other accountable, and can we hold ourselves accountable too? We all know where that kind of threshold is, and I'll put this in an example that I heard, but also I'll put it like in a real time kind of story that I thought was funny. So, there was a story that I heard, and it was a real story, but it was this dad. He was a doctor. And he decided that for him, it was really important that he took his kid to school and he dropped his kid off, and he picked his kid up from school. So that meant that he had to be done by 2 p.m. so that he could go pick his kid up from school. And everyone was always like, oh, you could make more money, if you worked longer. And he was like, I don't care about the money. Like, I don't need to make more money. He's like, it's more important to me that, I get to see my kid. And so it's like, what is that barometer for you of like, how much time are you trying to spend? What are those non-negotiables? How can you make that happen? And then just stick to that. And I had a story about a chief that there's these two chiefs, and they were from different agencies, and they held each other accountable, and their kids went to the same school. So they were at like the soccer game, and one of the chiefs didn't see the other one there. So she called her and was like, where are you? She's like, oh, like I have all these emails. I got all these things. And she goes, those can wait. Get your ass to the soccer game right now. And she goes, okay. And she got there and she watched the game. But how can we hold ourselves accountable? Like, how can we have our like kind of thermometer or barometer on like what's important? Try to make that happen, make that a priority. But then can we hold each other accountable too? So if we start to see people who are like maybe slipping and, not at the game, and you're like, is it an emergency or is it emails? If it's emails, get your butt over here because this is more important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You have to keep that in mind if they're a sport. It's like, why are you here? Do you really need to be here? Just go home. Just encourage them to go home. Encourage them to go do those things. You got to know your people. So you got to know what's in their lives. And sometimes they don't want to open up, but it's really important as a leader to know, so-and-so has so many kids, so-and-so, has this going on, or this person coaches or whatever. And, give them that latitude and make sure you're on top of it. And they're doing those things because what's important to them, and that they appreciate that in leadership too. So.
Yeah, I think that is important that you said, to know your people and to understand what they have going on. My final question, and you actually already gave a lot of different little nuggets of advice, but I have to ask the question for that younger generation. We know that they're going to be tomorrow's leaders. What words of wisdom would you share with them?
Well, that's a hard one. There's so many. Just don't wait. You really have to start preparing now. And I tell my guys all the time, like, you are the future of law enforcement. I'm not going to hold you back. I encourage you to take my spot. And if you're willing to do it, you got to step forward. Take those chances. Don't wait for the perfect time, because it's coming. It is coming very quickly. Before you know it, the opportunity to be right in front of your face, ready or not. So prepare now, and you'll be ready for when that position opens up in front of you and you take that chance to lead. And it's a very honorable thing to be able to lead these gentlemen and women in law enforcement, because they have a hard job. And I really want them to be able to take over where I'm at and do a better job than me. So that's what
Love it. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here today.
Yeah, anytime. I liked it. It was educational for me also.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you.